Hi, this is going to be a slightly different video than normal. Because we can't get out at the moment to take pictures of landscapes, what I thought I'd do instead is put up a talk that I gave to our camera club about our photographic trip to Iceland. There's lots of pictures in there and tales of our journey throughout the week, so I hope you enjoy it. Right, here we go. If you haven't got a cup of tea, go and get one. Make sure you're sitting comfortably, and I'll start to tell you about our photographic trip to Iceland. So this took place last year in 2019, in February. There were 4 of us that went to Iceland on this photographic trip, and we decided that we wanted to try and do it on a budget because Iceland is a notoriously expensive place. So we spent most of the nights in hostels or guest houses at the cheapest that we could find them. So it wasn't particularly luxurious, but we were there for the photography. So we suffered for our art as such. So if those who aren't aware, Iceland is about 1,000 miles away from Manchester, 2.5 hours on the plane, and it's quite a bit further north, so it ends up being quite cold. Iceland is known for its volcanoes and glaciers and such like, and our plan was to tour the southern coast along here. We landed in Reykjavik, which is over here, and then over the course of 2 days we were making our way to this place here, which is in striking distance of an ice lagoon. We ran into our first problem when we went to pick the car up from the car hire company. We were told that the road we were planning to use over the mountains was blocked because of snow and wind, and they said that the coast road would probably be open, but they weren't 100% sure. Now this left us with a bit of a dilemma. Excuse me. We were going to either try and get a place to stay in Reykjavik or make our way to Selfoss and carry on with the plan. So we decided to risk it and go along the road to Selfoss. It was very windy, but the roads were clear and we managed to get there without a problem. But we were constantly worried that they were going to close that road as well. But we did get to Selfoss, which was a really nice little town, lots of places to eat and drink, and it wasn't as cold as we expected, only 2 degrees. So it was not unpleasant at all. The first night was in a hostel and there was 4 of us in a room, so it was a little bit manly that night. But still, we were there for the photography, like I said. The following day, we decided to get up early and strike out for our first location that we were staying at proper. And we had an idea that we would do a little detour around by the coast. Seemed like a good idea. Turned out that there wasn't a lot to see. About the most interesting thing we saw was this lighthouse, and we didn't stop because the road was really treacherous, covered with ice. Even with studded tyres, it was still very tricky going. So we got off that as quickly and as safely as we could, and we started a journey again on the way to the next guest house. On the way we saw this waterfall, which was the first proper sight that we saw during the trip, so we had to stop and take some shots. We got some reasonable images, but it was difficult to actually get into locations, partly because of the amount of tourists that were there and partly because the paths were just covered with ice and you couldn't really get off the paths either. So that's about the best shot that I got from this location. We then, on the road, came across we saw some ponies just grazing just off the side of the road. So we thought we'd stop and see what kind of pictures we could get of those. They were very friendly and didn't mind that we were milling about them. And this one particular pony gave me perhaps one of my favourite shots of the week. We waited for him to move away from the group, so he was isolated. I'm calling him a he. I'm not sure whether he was a he or not. But we waited for him to get into a position where he was framed by the mountain and the river, and then just at the last moment I made a few noises and got him to turn his head and got this shot, and so I'm really proud of that one. Then we travelled through a town called Vik, which is famous for its black volcanic beaches, so we had a quick stop off there and took a few shots of the beach and the low sun. I was just a little bit annoyed. I was slightly late in taking the picture of this couple because they walked across here, and if I'd have got them in that gap there, it would have made a much better picture. But unfortunately, that's photography for you. And finally, we ended up at the guest house. Now, this is not my picture. This is from the brochure. It wasn't like this when we got there. It was covered with snow and ice. But it was a pleasant, comfortable guest house where we stayed for a few nights. But it gave us the ideal location to strike out for Jokhalsen the following morning. So we left in the dark to try and get there for sunrise. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Jokhalsen, it's an ice lagoon at the foot of a glacier. The glacier breaks off to form these icebergs within the lagoon, and the icebergs then flow out to sea and get washed back up on the beach. And so you can then take them again on the beach. So I decided that I'd go down to the beach for the sunrise to get this kind of shot of the sun rising behind the icebergs and lighting up the icebergs in this way, which I thought was quite good. I did actually miss out some brilliant light that was cast onto these mountains here. This was taken actually slightly after the iceberg. When the sun rose, it made the mountains pink, and the light was just phenomenal. But when I'd finished on the beach, I decided to go back to the lagoon. But unfortunately, came across a disaster. One of the members of the party had fallen and quite severely hurt himself. He'd broken his leg quite badly. So we spent the next hour and a half waiting for the ambulance to come, and then we carried him to the ambulance up a ridge and down the other side through some quite deep snow. And so this had quite severely changed our plans then for the day, because we realised we'd have to go to a hospital to visit him later in the day. So we thought there was no point going straight away. We'd just make the most of the location we were at. And so we'd got his boot left over that we'd taken off his foot. So I took this shot just to remember him by. It was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek shot. But we got some other shots of the lagoon and then went down onto the beach. Now you can see the amount of people that are there and the amount of ice on the beach makes it very difficult to find an iceberg that's isolated from the rest to get the kind of shot on the right. It's not impossible, but it just takes a little bit of searching. So then we decided it was time to go to the hospital and visit our friend. And we were travelling through this kind of scenery on the way to the hospital. And we did see some reindeer as well, so they were taken from quite a long way away, but they were still nice to see. On the way, we did get a phone call from our friend who said that the break was quite severe and he would have to be flown to Reykjavik to have an operation to put pins in his leg. So there was no point carrying on with that journey, so we had to turn around and head back to the guest house. Now at this point we were 2 days journey away from Reykjavik, so we decided that amongst us that we would carry on with our plans as normal, because there was nothing we could do anyway, even if we went back to Reykjavik. So we was back to our guest house, and this is a shot that I took on my phone and sent to the friend in hospital just to show what he was missing of our first night out, because he was quite keen on stout beer, and it was really nice. It was almost like a Guinness, but it was beautiful. And so we were still ribbing him even when he wasn't there. The following morning we decided to go back to Jokhalsen to try and get some more shots, because we were limited by the amount of time we had the day before. The weather wasn't quite as favourable this day. This is a shot that I took from my phone from the back seat. You can see that the wind is blowing snow across the road, making the driving conditions very tricky and a little bit scary as well. And because of that, it meant that we got to Jokhalsen slightly after the sun had risen, so we didn't get the same colours that we got the day before. But we did get more time to mill about and just take our time more to find better compositions. Now the wind did make some interesting patterns as it was blowing snow off the mountains and with the clouds, so it was kind of there was some benefit to it. And we went back onto the beach, and I got this shot, which is one of, again, my top 10 from the week. This iceberg was about 10 feet tall, and it got the sun behind it and just created this amazing pattern. Very, very striking, and lit up all of the wet beach in front of it. So I quite like that one. On the way back, the weather had seemed to have got even worse. We did get a whiteout. So this video here shows just how treacherous the driving was. At some points, you could barely see more than 10 meters in front of the car. These posts on the side of the road are about 25 meters apart, and at some points you just couldn't see the next one coming. It wasn't safe to stop because in case a car came up behind, we didn't want to get rear-ended. But you can see that there was lots of cars on the other side that were travelling fairly slowly. But we decided the best thing to do was to carry on going, and it was one of the scariest journeys that I think I've ever been part of. And fair play to the driver, who I think he really needed a stiff drink after the end of this, because this went on for about half an hour of these kind of conditions that you're seeing now. It was really, really scary. And then at this point, we heard a ambulance coming up behind. The ambulance is obviously responding to an accident. We could hear it. At this point, we couldn't see it, so we weren't sure where it was coming from, whether it was from behind us or whether it was from in front of us. But eventually, it did come past us, which there it is. And he was obviously a lot braver than we were, because he was travelling at quite a speed in virtually invisible conditions, and got to this accident here. Now, it actually wasn't anything serious. It just looked like a little bit of a prang between some people, so nobody was seriously hurt. But we carried on our journey back, and the weather did clear up. The wind was still really, really strong, but it wasn't picking snow up the same as it was in that last location. Just to give you an idea of how strong the wind was, this is a picture of me leaning with my full weight against the wind, and the wind was supporting me. It was so windy. It was unbelievable. Really, really, really windy. But we still got some nice shots of the glacier. That night, we went out to the same restaurant again, and I ended up with a free pizza, which was a big bonus in Iceland, because that pizza should have cost about £25. Yeah, £25, can you believe that? But they burnt the first one, so they gave me the second one for free. And it was a really, really good pizza. Really good pizza. And that night I got my first, albeit very blurry, shot of the Northern Lights. We weren't really prepared for going out, but we were nipped out around the back of the guest house just to see if there was anything happening, and saw this. So I hastily took some shots, but I hadn't really taken the time to focus properly. I'm still relatively pleased with the shot, because it was the first one I'd got of the Northern Lights, and I did like the way that the car that had just started, its brake lights, I think, had covered that, caused that red light in the foreground. So it's interesting, but it's not actually a very good shot. So day 5, we were on the way back along the coast towards Reykjavik. We weren't going to go as far as Reykjavik, but the guest house that we've found was just the other side of Vik. So in this area here, we've got Vik that we've already talked about, and quite a few waterfalls in this area that we were interested in visiting. So we knew that on the way to our next guest house, we would call at a waterfall. And this is the waterfall that we stopped at first. Now, those people who are familiar with Game of Thrones might recognise this. Jon and Daenerys flew on a dragon and landed in front of this waterfall. Now, in the programme, it was enhanced quite a lot with things behind it that aren't there in real life, but it's the location that they used for that. An amazing place, but definitely needs spikes on your shoes, because this area in front is like an ice rink. It's solid sheet ice. So it's a little bit hairy, especially trying to rest your tripod on it. But it was an amazing place. Then we wanted to go and see another waterfall that we knew about. So we followed some coaches that seemed to know where they were going. Turned out it was the wrong way, but we got to a car park, strapped on our spikes onto our boots and followed the crowds and ended up here at an amazing glacier again. The glacier was huge. This photograph doesn't do justice to the size of it. And in front of it was a huge lake that was frozen over. And then these tributaries flowed out of the end of it. An amazing place that we found by accident. It's just great. And so here are a few more shots. There's one of our party stood on a little bit of rock in the middle of the lake. Well, he's on the edge of the lake, but out in the lake, but it's no problem walking on the ice. Just to give you an idea, that is the foot of the glacier, and on the top just here there's a little speck. That's actually a group of walkers that were having a tour on top of the glacier, just to give you an idea of the scale. And we also noticed this happening. There was a pool of water that had liquid water on it, but as we stood and watched it, it would freeze over. It would turn to ice just as we stood and watched, and then it would unfreeze again and turn back to liquid water. It must have been right on the very edge of freezing point and going between frozen and liquid. It was quite an amazing sight to watch. I feel like I'm using the word amazing lots and lots of times, but it really does describe the feeling of being in Iceland. And just to top it off, when we were on our way back to the guest house and drove past the waterfall again, Skogafoss, and from the car I could see that it was in sunlight. And so I said, well, let's turn around and nip back to the waterfall again, because it's only seconds off the road. And as we got there, we realised that the sun was making all this, was causing a rainbow in all of the spray coming up off the waterfall. So we got the shot on the right, and I got one of the party just to go down to the foot of the waterfall to get the shot on the left. So these again are two of my top 10 shots from the week. I'm really glad that we went back to this place. So that was it for the day. So we thought, right, it's time to go and find the guest house. There's the guest house. But on the window, there was a sign that said, inquiries go to the local restaurant. So off we went to the local restaurant, and they told us, right, yes, this is where you check in, but your chalet is another kilometre down a gravel road. And so we thought, oh my goodness, what are we going to find when we get there? But what we found was this. It was an again, I'm using that word amazing again, a brilliant chalet. There was just us staying in it, 2 bedrooms and a big living room, kitchenette kind of place, right in the middle of nowhere on a plain, at the foot of these mountains. So in the night time it was pitch black. It was a really super location. It gave us the opportunity the following day to strike out to this place, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, but it's a promontory that sticks out into the sea, a big cliff with a sea arch that we didn't go to. But from the top, we managed to get this view back inland. And again, this is one of my top 10 shots, or top 10 favourite shots from the week. I just love the way that this house in the middle of this plain seems really desolate. It almost seems like a Lord of the Rings kind of scene, but with this house just stuck in the middle of nowhere. So I really do like that shot. Then we wanted to go and visit Vic Beach, but the other side from the headland that we'd visited the previous day. On the way, we came across this church, which we just had to get out and take photographs of. We probably spent about half an hour there and I probably took about 100 pictures from different angles and just to try and get the best one. But we were really lucky with the light. The sun was catching the church at some points and causing shadow behind. It was just a really excellent photographic moment. And when we got to Vic Beach, this is what we found. Now this picture on the right was taken from the promontory that you saw in the previous picture. And just to give you an idea, this beach is about 2 miles long. Over there is a coach park that has probably about 50 coaches on it. So that just gives you an idea of the scale. So we parked over there and then walked just this stretch of beach down at the end. And this pinnacle here is that one there, which again is one of my favourite shots from the week. We were going to go to Vic for some tea, an evening meal, but on the way over the top of this headland, the snow really kicked in and it was quite nasty weather. So when we dropped down into Vic, it wasn't fit to get out of the car. So we decided to just carry on driving a little bit. And as we hadn't travelled very far and the snow stopped, and we decided to get out at an isolated beach. We just turned off the road up a little track and we found a beach that nobody had been on. So we'd got really lovely patterns in the sand, and the snow on the beach and the black sand created some really interesting patterns. And then the sky cleared a bit and we got some nice early evening sun that would just really lit up the sky. So that was a really good accidental find again. That night I was just about to get into bed. I looked out the window and I saw some colour happening in the sky, so I got the camera out and set the settings for best northern lights, and realised there were some things happening. So I went into the living room and said to the other guys, "Come on, there's some northern lights happening." So we got the warm clothes on and went and stood outside, and we got probably the best shots that we got during the week of the northern lights. And this one is better than the one I took before because I'd taken more time to focus so the stars are sharper. They're not the most spectacular northern lights. I've seen better shots. The foreground's not most interesting, but I'm still really pleased that I got a shot of the northern lights. Day 7 was a little bit of a washout. The morning was really, really nasty weather. We couldn't go out, but it did give us time to plan what we were going to do in the afternoon. We knew that the rain would probably stop around dinner time based on the forecast. So at 1 o'clock we went out and we struck out for the famous plane that has crashed on one of the beaches. But when we got to the car park, there was about 50 cars there, and the plane is about another mile walk from the car park. So we decided to leave that because if there was going to be a lot of people there, it probably wouldn't be worth it. That's not my photo, by the way. It's one I've borrowed off the internet. So we'd seen a church from the road that we thought we might go and take some pictures of. Unfortunately, it was a little bit disappointing. That's the best shot I think I managed to get of it, because just to the left was a JCB and there was a few other buildings that weren't very photogenic around it as well, so it was really difficult to get a good shot of it. But when I turned round 180 degrees and looked back towards where the road is, I got this shot, which I'm particularly proud of. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I really like the way that it makes the whole landscape feel really immense. Just very pleased with that shot. But we'd spent the morning planning how to get to the waterfall that we couldn't find the previous day. The reason we wanted to get to this waterfall is we knew that you could get behind the waterfall, which was something we were really interested in doing. Now, it's quite a precarious path to get to it, so it wound all the way down this valley. And when we got there, the path comes along here and then turns into ice that is being caused by all the spray from the waterfall. So based on knowing that one of our party had fallen and broken his leg, we were a little bit dubious about going across the ice, but we got spikes and we tested it out, and it turned out to not be as treacherous as we thought. And we did manage to get behind the waterfall to get these shots. And this is one of those moments where we both stood there and were just pumping the air with our fists. It's just one of those serene moments where you feel lucky to be in a location like this. I had the same feeling on the side of the ice lagoon, and about the only other time that I felt this way is in the Zhangjiajie National Park in China. Just an immense location that's almost out of this world. Super place. And the final day, we left to get to Reykjavik. We were staying in a guest house the night before we flew back that was in striking distance of the airport. So our goal was to get back, go and visit our friend who had been put up in a hotel, and visit Reykjavik on the way. So that was the plan. We got to Reykjavik, which is an interesting city. The cathedral is very modern in its design and quite interesting. There's lots of other interesting buildings there in Reykjavik as well. But we did go and visit our friend whose insurance company had put him up in a really nice hotel and had even flown out a nurse to look after him. They were going to fly him back on a different plane, but he'd had pins put into his leg and obviously was in quite a bit of pain, but on the whole he was in quite good spirits. So we had an evening meal with him and then went off to our final guest house that was just about 5 minutes from the airport, because we've got quite an early flight the following morning. So that was our final night, and then we were off to the plane and back to England. So this was one of the final shots that we took before we left our chalet, and we purposely left a gap for our missing friend just to remember him by. But that was our trip to Iceland. Hope you've enjoyed that slightly different video, and well done for getting to the end. I'll leave you with a slideshow of all of my favourite shots from the week. But for now, stay safe and I'll see you soon.